gentlemen, welcome to the 20th Century Geek channel. This is our new show that we're doing. Not entirely sure what we're going to call it just yet. We're going to be calling it something like, I don't know, mini bites or something like that. It's probably not that mini. It's just the fact that when Julian and I start talking, it usually goes on for a couple of hours. So we are going to limit ourselves to 30 minutes to talk about specific things, a specific topic, so we can try and get to a decision, I suppose, is really the best way to put it. So the first show we're going to be talking about is Marvel versus DC. But Julian, first, before we kick off, how are you doing? Are you okay?
I am doing fine. I'm COVID-free and glad it is going to be 2021 soon. How about you?
Yeah, same here. Tested and COVID-free. I think that should just become a welcoming now. Instead of hello, everyone just welcomes it. COVID-free. COVID-free.
I'm just scared in 30 minutes will we get past the greeting, you know. Yeah, I mean, we'll just start outlining ideas.
Yeah. One thing I'm going to say before we do start is about that. Yes, we all want it to get to 2021, but let's not forget Mad Max 1 is also set in 2021. So, you know, could that be prophetic? I've got my leather biker gear and sawn-off shotgun waiting in the wings just in case. But yes, off topic.
I'm actually wearing leather pants with a shotgun. You just can't see it in the video.
That's it. Yeah. Well, that's probably no more. Look, I'll aim for Mad Max, but I'll end up being like one of the guys sort of strapped to the front of a beach buggy or something as they drive through the British countryside. So no, Marvel versus DC. Now this is really sort of an open question, as sort of like, you know, which universe is better, or which publishing house is better? How do you want to take it?
I think either. I mean, I think that they sort of overlap. There's not a lot that either company has done outside of some of the Vertigo stuff that's sort of in its own universe. And I got to say, for me, this is a very easy call. Is it an easy call for you?
No. I thought it was, and then I started to put points together, and I was a bit like, okay, this could be a bit more difficult. Okay, let's start with you then. What's your easy call? How do you call this?
For me, it's DC. It's DC all the way. And I was thinking about this, and I thought there's really only two periods in history in which I would prefer Marvel. So, you know, let me start with those caveats. One is maybe early 90s, when you've got like Claremont on X-Men, you know, which I don't think reads well now, but it had a lot of energy. And you've got Miller on Daredevil. And, you know, there was not a whole awful lot going on at DC. I mean, I like that stuff, but that period Marvel probably beats. And the other is the golden age of Marvel Comics, indisputably, which was right around 2000 with Joe Quesada. You know, where it was just like Grant Morrison is on New X-Men. You've got, you know, Ecstatics. You've got, you know, Tangled Web of, you know, Spider-Man. I mean, everything. You've got Garth Ennis Punisher. You know, you've got Bendis and Malieve on Daredevil. I mean, all the second, you know, I mean, Captain America was good, for God's sake. You know, it was a very experimental era, and I think that era is just the golden age of Marvel. Outside of that, DC wins every time, and I'll tell you why. DC is smart. The number one thing is DC is smart. Okay, even in the old Marvel comics, right, of the 60s that everybody loves, right? I mean, if you think, you know, you think X-Men is unreadable today, those 60s comics are unreadable today. They are so dumb. And I know that it's like, oh, the pop art era. But meanwhile, it's like you got at that same period, you've got those, you know, crazy Julia Schwartz covers. You know, you've got like Flash doing Flash Facts. All of, you know, people kind of hated that the DC characters were, you know, a little more kind of like suit-wearing guys, you know? They were a little more prim and proper, and they were scientists. That's what I like. You know, the Marvel characters were dumb. You know, and every time they meet, they're just like, oh, why are you here? Let's fight. I mean, it was the epitome of stupid. And, you know, the DC characters, there was a lot of dumb plots, but I mean, they're scientists. You've got like flashbacks in the back. That's how I learned about tachyons, you know? I mean, how cool is it that I'm learning about tachyons in a fantasy comic from the 60s? That's awesome. So, what about you?
No, I see what you mean, and this was the struggle I had, because I do agree with everything you're saying, and I the thing that kept coming up to me was, which books do I go back to? A bit like what you're saying there with the Flash and and sort of other things. And you say about that golden age of Marvel, that sort of the early 2000s. Like, I sort of not fell off, but I was in a low ebb with comics sort of in the 2000s, and it was that early 2000s, 2004, 2005 ish. I really got back into it, and it was Marvel that brought me back in. Things like Civil War, Brubaker's Captain America run, then getting into sort of like Garth Ennis's Punisher Max, those sorts of the books, and then, like you say, expanding to find like Bendis and Malieve doing Daredevil, all the ones you mentioned, and you're like, oh man. And then came like Ultimate Universe. Now, a lot of the Ultimate Universe is garbage. It really is. But then you get like Bendis doing that reboot of Spider-Man in that, and obviously you get Miles Morales from that. But even before that, that first 60 issues of Bendis doing Spider-Man, and like literally going, well, this is what he was in the 60s, and this is what he is now, and doing it well. I mean, I'm not a Bendis fan, I'll admit. Like, I think Brian Michael Bendis is very hit and miss, but that's one of the only times they've gone, this is a reboot of a character, and they've really put like passion and stuff into it, and really sort of thought it out. So to me, if you were asking me this question, say, like you say, 10 years ago, the question would be without a doubt Marvel. Because I'm like, yeah, they're onto a winner. They've got all this stuff coming up. They're really, they're trying to do all this stuff. I can see where they're going to try and go. And now they've got the MCU, blah, blah. And then something seems to have happened with Marvel where, and this will be controversial, I suppose it's controversial, but like, I just don't read Marvel anymore. Like, there's nothing in Marvel that interests me anymore. And so like, every now and then, the only thing I ever go back for is there'll be something like Moon Knight might have a run. And recently, Jason Aaron did a Moon Knight-centric Avengers arc, which was dreadful, but I still read it all. And then all of a sudden they'll throw out a title and you go, this is really good. So the one I'm sort of following through trade at the moment is Immortal Hulk. And I go, well, if they're doing this, you said about that golden era, if they're doing this run, maybe other stuff's good. So I'll dip into it. It's not good. And like you say, it doesn't seem to be a consistency across Marvel. And so then I thought, okay, well, then maybe DC is winning in that way. Again, like, DC is very hit and miss. They'll have the odd sort of character that's having a really good, solid run. But again, I'm not reading a whole heap of DC stuff at the moment. Like, the way they've treated Batman and just repetitive city-destroying events where I'm just like, oh, God, I can't be doing with this anymore. Or another crisis-level event to do with, metal is just, it's... But I think, is that just the way that the industry's gone? And so I thought, okay, well, maybe let's let them off that. If I to look back at like the milestone books, if I look back and go, if I'm going to introduce you to comics, here's what you've got to read. And all of a sudden, I was thinking Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, and then I was thinking, well, actually, even like Crisis on Infinite Earths. Right. I was just naming DC books. And I was like, okay, well, maybe Civil War, because, like you said, maybe sort of Born Again for Daredevil, but that's it.
Well, I'll do you one better. Sandman. Yeah. Sandman, for God's sake. Okay. Hellblazer. I know they're Vertigo, but they're in the DC universe.
Alan Moore Swamp Thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Moore Swamp Thing, for God's sake. I mean, these are seminal runs. If you just want to talk about the highs that have changed comics and are mandatory reading for anyone who's into comics. I mean, yeah, if I had to choose between Civil War and Crisis on Infinite Earth, Civil War is the better story. But but it was produced, 30 years later. 20 years later. But, looking at work for work, yeah, okay, so you lose the Daredevil stuff, but you pick up Alan Moore Swamp Thing, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any competition between those two sets of like great works.
Well, this is the thing as well, because the more I thought about it, the more I say, and I was looking at my collection, I was thinking like, so what have I got that stands out as, I'd say, experimental or even industry or genre defining? And I look back and I was like, okay, for me, Howard the Duck from the 70s, like that stands out to me, and that's Marvel, and that's like, really sort of creator driven. It had issues that were just all prose. He ran for president. It was all kinds of weird things. Like he interacted with his creator at one point. You go, okay, well, that's something. Captain Britain, Alan Moore's Captain Britain, and when he obviously moved to Alan Davis, I really love that stuff. It's weird, it's experimental, it's reality twisting. But again, that's early 80s. So 70s and 80s, Marvel is really strong. And I think, they did the horror stuff. You have like Tomb of Dracula, which I do surprisingly like.
Yeah.
And, but again, like none of it, would I say, would stand up to what I would say are sort of like milestone comics. Again, like you said, you go, yeah, I really like that, and I really like the Marvel stuff. But then you go, yeah, but DC let Grant Morrison do his run on Doom Patrol. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, it's not just Doom Patrol, okay? I mean, it's Doom Patrol. It's Grant Morrison's Animal Man. It's Grant Morrison's JLA, which is great. So and I would say about that, like, golden age of Quesada that I praised, and I love, look, the Ultimates was fantastic. I mean, Mark Miller came out of that, and the Authority. But I mean, look, the Authority. Are we counting Wildstorm? I mean, the Authority, Wildstorm was a powerhouse in much the same period. And I think that, I mean, let's not even go into like Transmet and, all that stuff, which is DC, but not DC Universe. The thing about all those Quesada books is that was a period in which I would say like the average for Marvel was pulled up to like a B, where, you could just pick up a random book and it was a solid above average read and it was doing something different. But none of those stories really hit A plus kind of levels. Those were, a few did, a few we could argue, but, that was a period in which the bar was just raised across the entire line. But it seemed to me that they weren't aiming for like those milestone stories. And I don't know. I mean, look, I'll go back and I'll read, Punisher Max. But if I have to choose between Punisher Max and Hellblazer, I know which one I'm going to choose. Again, like I love Marvel Boy by Grant Morrison. I love New X-Men by Grant Morrison. But between those and Doom Patrol, Animal Man, JLA, I mean, JLA changed the industry. Now, I mean, Marvel's is probably a milestone book. I mean, Marvel's cannot be, diminished in any way, shape, or form. But JLA took that Reconstructionist approach and made it, the dominant superhero mode. I don't know.
But then, like you're right, because again, like, there's been some, and I think about standout Marvel books, and I think of like you say in the Marvels, which I do love, and I think it's great. And then things I'm trying to think of like some of those that are also, I would say, defining are sort of like Iron Man Extremis, Warren Ellis. That sort of like the design, and that book literally birthed the MCU. Using Adi Granov's art.
You're citing that as a positive, right?
Yes, I am, because I like the MCU, but also as a book, as a milestone, as having an influence. I think it's actually still a good book. It sort of introduced a different era, and the same with like Civil War. Like Civil War wasn't just an event. Like Civil War, I wouldn't say it's still having an impact now, but it had an impact for years to come. Like it impacted every character and altered the way some characters' trajectories went. And you got some really good issues out of that. I'd say you get books like Old Man Logan. You know,
Yeah,
I really enjoy Old
I
Man
do
Logan.
too.
But
Yeah.
then, you know, it's a great book. But how much of that is actually just almost like a redo, basically, of The Dark Knight Returns?
Yeah, and then you get into the question of like how much do you give credit for going first, right? This kind of cult of originality that we have in the West. And yeah, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to the argument that if I had to give a new comics reader something, I might go for Old Man Logan over Dark Knight. You know, but again, there's other stuff that I would put above Old Man Logan. You know, so here's another thing. All right, if I have read basically every issue of the Flash and Green Lantern ever published. They stand up pretty well. There's bullshit along the way, but I mean, you know, the Barry Allen stuff is the Flash facts and it's weird stuff. I mean, they're doing like a giant storyline of Flash, the trial of the Flash before Crisis. He dies in Crisis. Wally West. You have this generational story of Wally West coming in, and doesn't feel like he's worthy enough. You know, and then he grows up, and of course they reboot it, and that's kind of horrible. But those are all. I mean, you're talking about like runs of like 250 issues or 500 issues that are readable. Green Lantern, same thing. You know, I mean, there's weird stuff along the way, but I mean, it's fascinatingly weird. It's not. I don't think anyone would put these 500 stretches up against like Hellblazer or Sandman or something, but they are readable, longevity, long cuts of a character that stand up as solid work. Nobody can do that for a Marvel character. There's no Marvel character you can do that with. Daredevil's probably the closest. Most Captain America stuff is horrible. Most Thor stuff is horrible. And so here's a problem that I would say is I can think of, I mean, so we're talking about like great works. Here's another metric about just the characters and whether there is a sort of longevity, whether there is a set of solid stories behind them. We now live in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? I mean, that's changed everything. And you mentioned Extremis. Okay. I mean, Armor Wars, you know, I mean, I grew up, the Demon in a Bottle, you know, I grew up on that stuff. Yeah, that's about it. You know?
Yeah. This is something
that's better than, what are the classic Thor stories? The Beta Ray Bill stuff, which is beautiful to look at, but, you know, I mean, what are the classic Captain America stories?
Well, this is it. I think that one of the weird things with Marvel is that characters become niche. You know, I don't know many people that would class themselves as a Marvel fan, right? Okay, and if they do, you go, okay, well, if you're a Marvel fan, does that mean you love everything? I'm not saying you have to. No. But I really like Boom. You know, and it could be like yeah. You know,
Iron Man.
I really like Moon Knight. Does Moon Knight have classic stories in his backlog? Does he have a bunch of stories that I'm going to hold up as go, these are industry defining? No, not by any shot. Now there are stories in that I love, you know, that have been interested and you know within that sphere of Marvel and stuff have been important. But yeah, they're not going to go up against some of the stuff that's gone up in Marvel and in DC. But then you get some people that go, I'm a real big Captain Marvel, is in Carol Danvers fan. Like, you know, she's got the Carol core. Like, there are dedicated people to that character. That's ace that people are that dedicated.
Too. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the same for Miss Marvel or Iron Man, or there are people that are dedicated to the characters, but they're dedicated to the characters rather than the wider universe. And you say about Captain America, like, I love Chris Evans' version of Captain America. Like, I think he did a very good job of making him an interesting and you know watchable character in the MCU. My introduction to Captain America, unfortunately, was Ed Brubaker's run. Now, I say unfortunately because it's probably the best Captain America that there's ever been.
I agree.
So then I went to seek out other stuff, and either side of it, there's some other good. There's some. What's it? Mark Waid did some bits that are all right. with what's it, Cassidy, and then you go back further. There's like Dan Jurgen stuff, which is really it's fun, but not going to be it's not worth reading a great deal of. And like you say, none of it stands out And again, that's a character where you go, all right, well, I'm not a Captain America fan, but I love the Ed Brubaker run because it introduced me to the Winter Soldier. And it comes to this thing of like flexibility of characters in Marvel, that there are very few characters that have maintained. They don't reach an iconic status because they're too flexible and too changeable. So, like, if you really want to, you could. For example, let's use Doctor Strange as an example. As a fantasy and magician character, like he's the Sorcerer Supreme. Like, you could make him iconic. He's got an iconic look. Yeah, he can have a silhouette that's identifiable. He has the potential to have stories that are street level through to cosmic. Why is he not massive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, like look, I love the JMS Spider-Man, for all of its faults. I mean, my version of the older Spider-Man is a guy who's a high school teacher. I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I like the JMS Doctor Strange series. But what are the classic Doctor Strange stories? And you said this thing about the characters being not being as iconic at Marvel. And I thought I was going to get in trouble because I was going to say exactly that. I was going to say, like, look, I know they're successful in cinema. I'm sorry, Iron Man is not iconic. Nope. He's a guy in a suit, okay? There's lots of guys in a suit. We've been watching that for years. You know what's iconic? Superman's iconic. Batman's iconic. You can see that silhouette and you know who that is. And he's been a cultural touchstone since before we were born, since decades before we were born. I have this other theory about Marvel characters, is that really Marvel characters are grounded in a historical period. So you look at like Superman, and obviously like the Superman of like that was created by, Jewish kids in the late 30s is an awesome Superman, right? He's fighting against, wife beaters and corporate elites, right? That's awesome. But Superman has like the 50s Superman, the 60s Superman that's just like trippy and crazy. That's also just iconic. He has evolved and, he is flexible. But Superman does not feel as if he's stuck in the 30s. Batman comes out of that pulp tradition. You obviously understand those origins, but you can transplant him into present-day Gotham. Nothing about Chris Nolan feels like you're forcing the Shadow into Gotham, right? The Fantastic Four. Part of the space race against the Russians. And cosmic rays, I mean, the Fantastic Four are so grounded in that Cold War thing, and you can take them out of it and just say it's an experimental group, and it kind of works. I mean, I think all of those characters feel very grounded in the 60s to me, with the exception of Captain America, who goes back further. I mean, the Hulk, it's the gamma rays, Iron Man. My version of Iron Man is Iron Man in Vietnam. You read the original Iron Man and he's in Vietnam. And it's like, yeah, he's going to fight some Viet Minh, in this Iron Man suit, which is what they should have done. And like the authority back then. That's the Iron Man that I want. Same thing, Punisher. Like, you got to keep updating Punisher because he was so grounded in Vietnam. It does not work if he's like, I mean, I hate to say it, but it doesn't really work if he's like, yeah, I was in Iraq. I was in Afghanistan. I saw some messed up stuff. Yeah, that's not as universal a meaning of American culture as Vietnam was.
And this is the thing, isn't it? I say, and this is one of the problems. But I think this comes to the thing of continuity, which I have a problem with. Like, and I have a problem with it in DC because of the reboots. And we were sort of talking about this a little bit off air before we started. Is Batman's got how many sidekicks? He's supposed to be this lone vigilante that's now got like, basically a small factory of sidekicks being produced behind him, with all sort of like, random sort of like bird-related bloody names. And at some point you go, the timeline on this doesn't work because basically in a 6-month period he became a vigilante and then basically started collecting kids, and it becomes to get a little bit creepy. And so there are problems with that. But then again, the problem with Marvel doesn't have these legacy characters, but when they do treat them better. I think they treat legacy characters better in Marvel than they do in DC. I don't have an attachment to those legacy characters because I'm not of that generation, but I do think the legacy characters in Marvel are treated better. I think of like Miss Marvel, I think of Miles Morales, I think they've gone for diversity, I think they've gone to stretch the things and make them more appealing. And so I think they've been braver in that way, and I'm hoping that will lead to another golden age in Marvel. You know, there'll be an upswing and everything will be great. But the problem I also have, the bonus I think that DC has that Marvel doesn't seem to have the guts to do is DC's willing to look backwards and forwards, or forwards and backwards, whichever you want. So, for example, you have stories like Kingdom Come, way back when, of going, this is the future, it's a mess, but here's how it happened, and here's all the bits and pieces. You know, or the Dark Knight Returns, and they have this opportunity to do this story. Like they created Batman Beyond as a legacy character in cartoon, and then introduced him and went, "Yeah, there you go, you can have this," and he's going to have it a place in this universe. Like they've got the Legion of Superheroes in the year 3000, and then they've got Jonah Hex kicking around in the Old West, and you know you've got this. It's not just the now, which is what I think Marvel exists in. Marvel exists in the now. But DC exists in a wider universe, you know, across time and space. And I find that a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I will say, I think that, you know, like the stuff leading up to Flashpoint and everything post Flashpoint, there's very little that's good at DC. You know, you have to really strain. I mean, I know you're a huge Snyder Batman fan. I liked, you know, like Grant's Action Comics. Grant's doing, you know, Green Lantern. Anything Grant touches is at least interesting.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think both companies, I go through the solicitations now, and I just think, who is interested in this stuff? So I've aged out of it.
Yes.
You know, that's just reality. And I'm not interested in Wonder Woman's got a chainsaw, or, you know, Wolverine now has laser beam eyes, you know. This stuff doesn't interest me, but you know, it interests some people. And I will say that I will give credit for, you know, Mrs. Marvel, Ms. Marvel, and Miles Morales. I mean, I'm a huge Miles Morales fan, and I think that Marvel has done a better job of not necessarily creating these legacy characters, but adapting, but making these have a strong presence. Miles Morales has his own video game that is like the top #2 video game or something right now. Yeah. That's amazing. People want to buy a PS5 just to play a Spider-Man game, and it stars Miles Morales. God bless him. But I will say one final thought is that DC is a more liberal company. You know, there are stories behind the scenes of the conservative, you know, sort of like Trumpist stuff going on at Marvel, and the, you know, DC liberalism that I think, it's not a surprise, comes out with something like Vertigo. And for all of DC's mismanagement and shutting Vertigo down, and there's a lot that I don't like that's gone on at DC over the years, I do think you see that liberal concern. You see, you know, there are those quiet stories where, like, Superman, here's a wife beater next door. One of my favorite Superman stories. And it's just like, what do I do about this? I can fight Darkseid, but how do I address this? DC always has a little bit of a kind of like social conscience to it, in a way, going back to Green Lantern, Green Arrow, that Marvel, I think, strains to do, despite like the Spider-Man drug story and stuff like that.
No, I agree with that. No, I agree with that. We've got a minute left as well. So I agree with that, though. I think both of us has really talked ourselves into siding with DC. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up there. We've both gone for DC. I don't think I'm going to say, I'm not dumping on Marvel. I think Marvel have done some great stuff. My favorite character is a Marvel character. There have some great runs, But I think overall, I think DC, with the sidelines of Vertigo, even recently Young Animal, they did some recently, they've done some interesting stuff. But, ladies and gentlemen, if you disagree with us or if you agree with us, let us know. Put your thoughts in the comments. And, what do you think? What's your favourite Marvel run? What's your favourite DC run? Which one do you think's best and why? Let us know, and we will come back to you with some comments ourselves.
Tell us why Valiant should have won.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe you think that. Maybe you think Valiant or IDW or one of the others is way, way better. We'll happily hear that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of our bite size. We're going to try and stick to the 30 minutes. So thank you very much. And we'll see you again soon.